Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. Don't worry, your eyes are not seeing double. We are literally in person, courtesy of Matthew Asbell. It is a pleasure to see a human being for the first time in 2 years. No, not literally, but for the purposes of Frank About Health, it is important that we are in person because, as you will soon later find out in the show, I will be his guest on Intangify tomorrow. We are both collectively unifying our shows for the purpose of healthcare. Healthcare is also an intangible asset, and he obviously has the knowledge and skill set to explain that further on his show. But yet, as every one of my listeners and viewers have experienced with my multitude of guests over the last 2 years, I have talked about specific diseases, specific treatments, mental health issues, epilepsy issues, cancer, diabetes, pharmaceuticals, alternative treatments. But at the end of the day, what is the through line? Everybody in general needs to be focused on their health care. Without health, you really don't have anything else that you can focus on until you feel a sense of peace and relaxation and knowing that you're being treated by the right medical professional, depending on what your condition is. But there's also this ongoing onslaught of misinformation, which is all based on the individual patient's experience. And as a result, everyone continues to go on about discussions of healthcare issues in the media or in society or with your doctor, but there's always a different interpretation, a different experience. And that's because we are different people with different needs. However, there has to be the collective understanding of what healthcare is. And that's why we're going to start on Frank About Health, discussing about 3 particular topics that have been ruminating in the healthcare space that always confuses people. And then we're going to go more in depth into the healthcare profession and every other aspect of healthcare tomorrow on Intangify. So before we go further with what this episode of Frank About Health will cover, I will issue my usual disclaimer, which is that anyone out there who's listening to this show today gets information from our discussion that may make you consider changing your ongoing treatment protocol. Please consult with your primary care physician or your neurologist or your psychologist or what other practitioner you are working with currently before you make such a decision. Frank About Health is here to provide you with food for thought that you can use in whatever treatments you are currently engaging in. We are not trying to force or make people stop ongoing treatment based on what you learn on the show today. That being said, I also want to say to the legal community out there watching this show, if what you hear from our discussion creates any sense of controversy, please know that I always am leaning towards the middle of the road scenario. I don't have any social or political viewpoints when it comes to healthcare, even though we live in a society today where there are a lot of hot topics being brought up. So I'm not here to create any potential libel or at the same time any slander. And like I said earlier, I'm also not trying to encourage patients from stopping their ongoing treatment. That all being said, I'd like to welcome one of our hosts here at Talkradio.nyc, Matthew Asbell, host of Intangify, and he has agreed to be on Frank About Health to talk about not only my healthcare questions, but what his show hopes to educate in the area of healthcare, as well as, if you've seen his profile, I know he went to med school, he's now a lawyer, he also did songwriting. We're talking about a diverse individual that has a lot to offer, and so I knew that he had to be on this show.
Songwriting being the most important connection to healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because sometimes you need music to ease your mind when you're about to undergo a surgical procedure. So I can agree with that statement. So that all being said, and by the way, I know we've been in the Zoom world looking face to face. That's not going to happen on this show. We're going to be having an actual conversation. So if you see our profile, that's fine. But know that you are engaging in what is going to be a 2-part healthcare forum discussion. And so at least you're going to get the information that is important for your healthcare needs, whether they're social, financial, or otherwise. Welcome to Frank About Health.
Thanks very much. You have more disclaimers on your show than I do, and I'm a lawyer.
I know, and you know, I think that's probably why for example, I mean, for anyone that's seen the show before, I had a co-host for a while that was a medical professional, Phyllis Quinlan, and I needed that to emphasize that what I'm saying is not just something to say because I am not a doctor. So I need the validation of a medical professional to at least give me the credibility. But now you're giving me the credibility from the whole aspect of why everyone's confused when it comes to healthcare. So I'm really hoping you're going to add that extra level of credibility so that people know that Frank About Health is a show to really get some tangible information about an intangible issue.
I hope that I can deliver on that.
Yes.
While you said that I went to med school, I didn't finish med school. I'm not a
Understood.
doctor either.
Understood.
But hopefully I can, and maybe it would be good for your guests to know that my area of law in particular is intellectual property.
Yes.
So it is really about what people create and how the law encourages that creation and protects that for them.
Right. And I mean, as you know, like obviously I've seen episodes of Intangify. I mean, I've seen you with IT people, people in entertainment, people, of course, in, you know, startup businesses, and of course, healthcare issues. So I can understand the big picture of intellectual property is things that you cannot see, taste, or touch. But healthcare, what makes it so confusing for most people in general, even the medical professionals, is that healthcare is about caring for you, the individual. We can all get our pharmaceuticals, we can get our tests done, we can do our vaccines, whatever. But everyone doesn't understand that that's just a piece of the big picture. And everyone, as a result, apparently seems to get lost on the small potatoes and not really understand that healthcare is more than just seeing your doctor or taking your medicine. It's really about thinking full focus about maintaining your own personal ecosystem before you maintain any other kind of ecosystem, like a relationship or a business or a podcast. You know, so other than that, what motivated you to first go into medical school and then go right into law? What was your pivot point in that experience?
Well, I can't say that I went to medical school and then I went right into law.
Okay.
But you know, I grew up in a family of doctors. So my grandfather was the kind of doctor who had the black bag. I mean, he literally had the black bag, and he went to people's houses with his black bag. When he passed away, and I was a late teen, he you know, there were newspaper articles about like the last of the old time doctors.
Yes.
His daughter is my mother, and my mother is 81 years old and still practicing medicine. So there were a lot of doctors in my family, and you know, honestly, the aspect of taking care of people, of helping people through difficult situations, was very appealing to me.
Right.
So I you know, and maybe lastly, I had an experience where I moved to Nashville, Tennessee after college to be a songwriter.
Right.
And I ended up at the what was back then called Kinko's Copies. It's now FedEx, right? But
yes.
I was in line and, you know, making copies of my resume as I was trying to get a job to survive.
Right.
And the person in front of me in the line was a doctor who was making photocopies of all the different variations of his logo for his business. We ended up in a conversation. It turns out that he was a psychiatrist focused on attention deficit disorder. And I learned a whole bunch about the attention deficit disorder, including whether it exists or not in my family, et cetera.
Right.
But that seeing him and seeing him as patients ultimately motivated me to go to med school. Now, I know I got to stop talking, so I'm going to be fast.
No. Oh, no, we're not headed for a break yet.
Well, no, I just want to give you the opportunity to interact rather than me talking all
No, this is this is your moment.
that moment. So I went to med school, but I did not want to give up my musical world. So about once a month while I was in med school, I would blow off the weekend and I would go to a recording studio, and I spent 2 years of medical school recording what ultimately was an original album of music, which then it was ready to be released at the time of my second year of medical school.
Right.
And I had to either study for the next step of medical school through the boards,
Right.
or I had to release the record. So I released the record.
Oh, were you signed to any particular major label or an independent label? Or?
I launched my own record label.
Very nice.
I learned all about copyright law. I learned all about radio promotion and publicity and how you get out there. And then I released the record. And the record had some success. There was some national airplay. There was a national magazine that published it. And then I started meeting other musicians who would ask me for help with their careers. And so I would help them with their careers.
Awesome.
And it was that, sorry, last bit. It was that when one of those artists I was working with started to get her music into film and television, and someone needed to do the contracts.
Yes.
That I learned that people who were managing recording artists like I was for about 10 years were usually people who went to law school and had a legal background. And you needed to have that to negotiate these contracts.
Correct.
So I went to law school to be a music lawyer, and then back in law school, it all came full circle. It's like, oh, well, your scientific background lets you be a patent lawyer. Okay, good. I'm going to do that. Your entrepreneurial background helps you understand trademarks. Well, I'm going to do that. So I came out knowing I was going to be an intellectual property lawyer, and that's where I've been ever since.
Well, believe it or not, even from the music perspective, you never left your initial medical dreams, because they do say music is therapy. And they do say with what it does to the brain when you're hearing specific wavelengths and specific melodies, it can either calm you down, it can be its own endorphin, especially those people that suffer from epilepsy like I do. Sometimes I found that music was preventing me from having the auras as frequently as I used to have them. I think that music is the common thread between your law and your medical aspirations.
Yeah, there was a period of time where I thought about music therapy, and they use that. That's one of many different kinds of modalities in which people get treated for healthcare issues.
Yes.
So music does have a health value to it. And so music's in your world, but music's in my world, because I'm dealing with, helping people with putting their music in film and television, or getting the copyrights registered, or making sure they get taken down off of the internet when somebody's song shouldn't be shared, or something of that nature.
Oh my God, we must have known each other in another life, because I think you know a little bit about my background. I worked for Sony Music and Columbia House for 10 years, but yet I was seeing the doctor very often because of my epilepsy. So I think that was my convergence that eventually led me to Frank About Health. But let's see, so far we're still good to go before our first break. But I do realize that how we met was by virtue of our relationship with Sam Leibowitz here at Talkradio.nyc. What brought you to launch Intangify? Is it related to your knowledge of intellectual property or the music industry? Or is it still that creative aspiration to get involved with helping others like you would have as a doctor, let's say?
Well, there's definitely the element of helping others, because I do that in my legal practice.
Right.
But where it really comes from, I guess it's part of that, and it's part about when you do anything, it's all about your personal brand, right? How should people perceive you? And I think something that has been important to me, more and more I'm learning what my personal brand is. You would think I would know, being someone who's in trademark law,
right?
But what I'm learning more and more about personal branding is that my own personal brand is about accessibility.
Yes.
And I also happen to be a professor, so I do a lot of education for students, and I get a lot of positive feedback from that. And I felt that this would be an opportunity for me to expand beyond exactly what I do in the law not sometimes I talk about that on my show, but not always.
Right.
Expand beyond that and then sort of be more accessible to, people who had different kinds of needs. So
Amazing. Well, so far, I think we're still, nope, 1 minute to break. So I guess I've learned after 2 years how to feel this without even noticing the actual chat box. Thanks again, Logan, by the way. But that all being said, stay tuned as we now delve into the 3 hot topics that qualify as intangible health right here on Talkradio.nyc, on our 4 socials, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and Twitch.tv. Welcome back for our second week. We'll be back in a few. Wow.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on Talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on Talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on Talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and Intangify your business today.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back. We're here with Matthew Asbell as we've just gotten an overview of this talented man sitting next to me on my left. I have to say that 3 intangible health aspects that continue to go through all of our minds, whether you're living a healthy life or whether you're having an ongoing recurring illness, are: what are the insurance companies doing, especially when it comes to brand versus generic drugs? Second, is the vaccine real? Should we have been taking that? My personal answer is yes, but we're going to learn a lot about the controversy surrounding that here on this episode. And third and finally, there are the inevitable social issues that continue to go on because a lot of people don't see the big picture. That we will save towards the end of the show. But I think the thing to start out with is the vaccines. And the reason is because when we talked prior to doing this show tonight, you and I were starting to flesh out other things that are not made visible to the patient. And I just thought that because of the whole controversy surrounding the mRNA vaccine, I have my theories about it. I know that it's considered a form of intellectual property. There's an intangibility to it. And at the same time, all the social backlash that we saw in the medical profession, as well as in politics and whatever the media outlets are reporting, it seemed as though it was contrapositive to trying to cure this pandemic. You took a real ready-made solution that was by some miracle ready-made in the nick of time, and everybody was battling against it. And that was what motivated me to come back to Talkradio.nyc. And I think that, Sam knows this story. I literally was going to create an entire program just about COVID, but the way that we're here today to talk about the mRNA vaccine, hopefully you'll be able to help me flesh out some of the realities of why the confusion. Because I could just say, yes, vaccinated 6 times, because I'm living with my father who has a comorbidity, which is cancer, and he's immunocompromised. So I'm also preventing myself from even giving a seedling that could compromise his current treatment. But mRNA is genetic code. It's not virus. It's not a medicine or an antibiotic. And because it was so unique and not the typical flu vaccine, let's say, people looked at it as a threat. And yet I looked at it with as much intelligence as I think I have when it comes to genetic understanding and thought, this is a blessing in disguise. So I was first to sign up. Well, as soon as I can get my hands on the vaccine when it was ready for my group. Can you explain to me why patients, or even when you see a cure for what was disrupting our way of life, it became a conflict?
I mean, to some degree, I want to say no, I can't, because it's not from my practice of law, it's not from intellectual property that would, that I could speak intelligently about that. I think I can speak from a cultural perspective of as a person, and
Right.
rather than as a lawyer, what I've learned and what applies to that, and maybe that will be of use.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you grew up in a family of doctors, they probably would have been one of the first to endorse it. Right?
Yeah, I think my mom was pretty quick on it. In fact, my father actually caught COVID right at the beginning period. So there was a lot of discussion about that at the time.
Right.
But I guess, some things that occurred to me as I was listening to you talk about it, and again, it's not from my legal perspective.
Right.
First of all, I think that there has been for a very long time an undercurrent of doubt about the healthcare establishment, other vaccines, and there were the anti-vaxxers before there was ever the mRNA vaccine for COVID.
Right.
And I think maybe there's an element of just sort of the expansive amount of information available to people now that it's easier to find people talking about these things, and sort of the WebMD generation of
Right.
We see something on the internet and we think this is the truth, right? I remember when my kids were born, there was discussion about, do I get my kids vaccinated? Is this all hype? What, and if we're being really fair, even as a patient,
Right.
especially someone who went to med school, right? So
Yes.
in med school, I think what I took away from it was that the medical establishment is extremely advanced on certain things,
Right.
and then extremely behind on lots of other things.
Yes.
And I remember being extremely frustrated in med school when they would, because what they were good at was they were good at labeling something.
Yes.
Go, yes, I see this patient has FUO. What's FUO? Fever of unknown origin. Great. So you can treat the symptoms, but you have no idea what the disease is. And it's not fair. The medical establishment we have antibiotics, we have radiation treatment for cancer, we have, monoclonal antibodies. There's all sorts of amazing things that doctors have done.
Right.
But there are aspects of the medical profession that they can't do anything about some things.
Yes.
And I found that very frustrating.
It's as if they didn't want to show their weakness of lack of knowledge, so they decided to put a label on something to just justify their credibility while maintaining their treatment with their patients.
I don't believe that. Maybe in some cases.
In some cases, yeah.
But I think, maybe the first step in getting to know a problem is identifying it and labeling it as part of the identification.
Right.
But I found frustration with, if all you can do is label it, then you really don't, you really aren't very advanced in terms of solving the problem.
Right.
The other thing that I guess I wanted to say tied into that is, one of the things I studied a little bit in med school had to do with alternative medicines, Chinese, medicine and Indian
Yes.
medicine and others of that nature that are thousands of years old.
Yes. Like even acupuncture, for example.
Yes. And also the battle between the osteopathic medicine society and the medical doctors.
Yes.
So there's some stuff going on there that sort of there's a challenge between them. They're like, oh, they're not a real doctor. There's this vibe, people say things like that.
Right.
But Western medicine, we're taught very surgical approach, tackle the problem, identify the problem, pinpoint it, and tackle that. And most Eastern philosophy is holistic.
Yeah.
You have a problem in your shoulder, I think it's your pinky toe. We need to worry about your chi and make sure it flows.
Right, exactly.
So I think that people in society are probably, like me, had some frustration with Western medicine in its inabilities to solve certain things.
Yes.
And then had some doubt, perhaps arising from, all they can do is name it, and then they don't
have a solution at the moment. Yeah.
And meanwhile, they have access to information out there that's saying, hey, the problem you have is because of vaccines. I had this vaccine, and then I had headaches for 6 months, and then I found out I had cancer. It must be because of the vaccine, right? Causality.
Yes.
That people would impose based on what they read, that somebody reported in a case study instead of statistics.
Yes.
So I could see all those things kind of coming into play and magnified by access to information. And that's what you see. I mean, we don't want to get into politics, but that is what you see with people finding theories as to why things are the way they are and grabbing onto them and then making them their thing. You may remember when COVID came out about, okay, what was the injection you're supposed to get? Detergent, bleach. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's like, somebody read that somewhere. Okay, let's grab onto that. Let's latch onto that and then publicize it.
Yes.
And the power of the machine in terms of putting it out there. And then people are like, oh, I should go do that. And we're sitting there like, wait a second, what's the science behind that? You're poisoning yourself.
Exactly. I guess if anything, the way historically our healthcare system had been modeled, especially since it was driven predominantly by the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies, is they just determined that anything new with no history or point of reference was not to be taken seriously. And anything that had already been proven or disproven in the past was going to be the short path to the idea that the past equaled the future. It just trains a lot of people to treat their healthcare, like you said, as a causality moment, not to live in the moment and understand that, wait, something is wrong. Like this air situation that we're having in New York City the last 2 days. I think I've even told you, I had 3 different interpretations of what was going on and not one of them was true. All I said was, give me my N95 mask and I'll go out for the day. But I guess it could be just from a psychological level. Nobody wants to feel less than purely healthy or as healthy as possible. So if they even think they have a symptom of something that they can't explain, they just start to blame people. They don't want to face it. It's almost like a denial mechanism.
Well, and that, it's about who you trust, because you have 80 million people out there purporting to be experts in all different kinds of things. And, it's who you decide you're going to listen to. And that's why you get these followings behind particular people. But there isn't uniformity because, the person who is a doubter, and the people who follow them.
Right.
So it's not, it's really a curse of too much information. We have too much access to information. Mm-hmm. And on one hand, we want to trust somebody, but we have to pick our team as to who we're going to trust.
That's true. But at the same time, there becomes the issue that if it's your healthcare, you have to trust yourself, how you feel, and with whatever knowledge you have. And no, I don't know this. Let me find the right person to talk to about it and not come to a false conclusion or a quick solution situation without really exploring it. But like you said, the team factor. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am on target. We're ready for our second break. When we return, we'll wrap up our discussion here about how the whole vaccine issue was made into a conundrum because of a lot of people not trusting the possible innovations that were needed during a very dire time in our healthcare. But at the same time, when I started Frank About Health 2 years ago, it was to help remove the stigma off a previous condition called epilepsy that was stigmatized because you were supposedly possessed by the devil or whatever they were saying at that time. The irony is when COVID came to town, it made epilepsy look like a neurological problem that can be managed. It took a pandemic to normalize what had been thousands of years scapegoated as some kind of devil worship. Now, that all being said, I want to put some more clarity on what we just talked about when we return, and then go right into the conflict between brand and generic drugs. Right here on Talkradio.nyc and on all of our socials. We'll be back in a few.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on Talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on Talkradio.nyc, and I will be Frank About Health to advocate for all of us.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on Talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
I just want to wrap up what we were just talking about during the break. I mean, the whole point of the confusion of the vaccine issue was lack of understanding over lack of knowledge of the future possible solution because of no history to work from. The constant sense of probably fear or defiance or not willing to take on a solution that might risk their health based on too much information out there. How does that qualify in legal terms as intangible? Would it be because people need hard proof to know that what they're afraid of or what they're optimistic about is true? Or what do they need to learn within themselves to advocate for their own health care, given whatever their noise they're hearing from various sources?
You know, again, I don't know this is really legal, but I think there is an aspect of what we learn in law school that applies here.
Okay.
Which is you don't trust as your primary information secondary sources. We're supposed to go to the primary source. We're supposed to look at the background. When there's a legal problem, before we drill down into our particular arguments, we think about, gee, what's the Constitution say? What's the statute say? What does the rule say?
Right.
Okay, now let's look at the where we are. Look at the case law. Let's consider it.
Right.
So there's an element of you need to go back to your primary sources, and the primary sources in healthcare are medical journals. These often are medical journals.
Right.
But they are hard to understand and read if you don't have that background, and they're dull. I mean, my mom, I could see her going through those journals, and they're dull. And
10 cups of coffee, please.
yeah, exactly. So there wasn't at least anybody digesting it down into what does this really mean, and it really was the doctor's job to look at not only one article in a medical journal, but the whole population of articles relevant to a particular issue,
Right.
and then boil that down and say, here's what the literature really says. And I guess I want to say one other thing about that, which is in my field,
Right.
the leaning, the bias is towards secrecy. It's not towards putting that stuff out there.
Yes.
When a client comes to me with something they've created before it's been launched, right? We want to protect that and own that. So we want to hold it back.
Right.
Until we've at least filed a patent application or whatever it is we feel like we need.
Right.
The medical community largely is the opposite. The scientific thinking is publish or perish, you hear, right? They've got to, they're motivated to create something and put it out as soon as they can.
Yes.
So they can share with the community and the community can benefit and build on what they know.
Right.
So it really runs counter to the intellectual property mechanism that's set up to encourage innovation. It's set up to encourage innovation, but it says keep it secret before you put it out there. Let's go protect it, and then you can go put it out there.
Right.
And scientists really struggle with that all the time because they're told by the companies that they work for, shut up, don't share this, don't publish it yet. Wait, we got to deal with this part first.
Right. Exactly.
So that might be what slows it down a bit,
But the irony is you just made a comment, publish or perish, right? Publishing, whether you're publishing a book or publishing a script, that's intellectual property law.
Sure.
So the irony is that it says to me, I mean, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that healthcare to some degree, it's not a legal profession, but it is definitely a social profession that requires legal support in order to have a follow through with something like the mRNA vaccine or even branded versus generic drugs. I think our people, especially when they're dealing with their healthcare problems, are they just not seeing that? I guess most people are blind to it, probably because the way the healthcare system has been set up, correct?
I think that's probably true. I think, when you and I spoke preparing for this podcast, I had mentioned to you about the vaccine in other countries.
Right.
And even not just the vaccine for COVID, but let's just talk about access to medicine in other countries. This might be a good segue to your next topic.
Yes.
Because there's a treaty, an intellectual property treaty that is in place to recognize that there are people in certain countries and other countries that can't afford to get the pharmaceutical that they need,
Right.
or that can't produce it.
Right.
And the licenses, if they were allowed to be negotiated freely by the parties, they wouldn't be able to afford. And so this treaty that I'm talking about has sort of carve-outs that allow governments to decide that we're going to put on pause the rights in order to create the medicine we need, or we're going to set what the licensing amount, the fee that you have to pay, we're going to set that rather than letting you guys negotiate, letting the pharmaceutical or a company to dictate what they
Right.
want to get paid for that because we need it. And there was some discussion of that during COVID, when before that was coming out.
Yes.
Gee, maybe we need to suspend, maybe we need to get all these other companies to be able to produce the vaccine too. It wasn't just about free competition and these 2 or 3 companies that were doing it.
Yes.
A lot of other countries didn't have access at the same time that we did to the vaccines that we had access to.
Right.
My wife's from Brazil. In Brazil, the first vaccine, I think the first vaccine, or at least the most prominent vaccine that was available, was a Chinese vaccine. I think it was called Sinovac or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And it had much lower efficacy, and but that's what they could get because of what are they paying and what are the deals between the parties, the
Yes.
owners and the governments.
Yes.
So there's elements of private rights and private ownership of intellectual property, rights.
Yeah.
And then the interest of the public in getting access to the medicine. What can we get them? What can we have produced? What will it cost? How can they afford it? And sort of enabling, that access that runs counter to the legal.
Well, you're perfectly right. This is definitely an issue for the second thing of generic versus branded drugs, because it's still country by country specific. Is it manufactured in our country? Was it distributed to that country? Are you a socialized healthcare system like the European Union is? Are you a monetization system like the United States is? Therefore, wait a minute, we can only let you pay for the branded drugs if your insurance will cover it. So it's very interesting to see that part of the confusion, like in the case of the vaccines, and even in the case of switching between brand versus generic, it's still governed by the bottom line, for lack of a better word. It's like, it really is kind of shame the way I look at it within our country here, the United States, because while it may be the country of innovation and all that stuff, it almost serves as a deterrent to become innovative in a very profession that a lot of people need guidance in.
We're a capitalist society, and right, so we are letting business drive these decisions. And you could argue that in the field of healthcare, you don't want that, because competition. Competition is still good, but you don't want people withholding that technology. You want advancement. You need advancement quickly, like in the case of your vaccine.
Right.
You need this stuff getting out there, and the other aspects of it that are interesting are, for instance, that how are drugs even identified in the first place? New drugs.
Right.
If you would hear stories of where a scientist would go off to the Amazon rainforest and meet a native tribe and learn that the medicine person, the medicine man, whoever it was within the tribe, was treating X problem with this leaf, whatever it was they found.
Right.
And this person would then take that, bring that back to their country, United States, wherever else, purify the active ingredient and say, this is my drug, and get a patent on it and own the rights to it. And, meanwhile, this has been around. It's existed. Someone brought it to the public, and the greater society more, and they purified it, but it didn't come from them. It wasn't their invention, so to speak.
Right.
But we were rewarding that as an invention, giving monopolies on those rights, even to the person who just happened to talk to the right medicine man and to find out, what was the treatment.
Wow, it's funny. I was telling you also about the chemical composition, or you were actually telling me the chemical composition might be reduced in the generic version. That is a direct relationship with the patent. Am I correct?
So, sort of. The patents don't typically dictate the exact amount of active ingredient that needs to be in something. Usually the patent is on the active ingredient, right? But they don't really dictate typically that sort of issue. That's more about regulatory with the Food and Drug Administration. Okay, this is my formulation with this active ingredient. I have this much in it, and then you get that approval. At least that's my understanding of the way the FDA works. And they do the trials, right, with that stuff.
Right.
The thing that now this was some time ago when I went to med school, but one of the things I learned in med school at the time, and it may have changed, was that the amount of active ingredient that would have to be in the generic drug was not the same or necessarily even that close to the branded drug. That I think they allowed like a 20% discrepancy, some very reasonably large number.
Right.
So, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the generic version had less. It could mean the generic version had more, right? There are toxicities associated with things too, right? So, so what you were getting with the generic was essentially treated as if it was the equivalent, and that's how the insurance companies treat it, and that's how doctors treat it, and people and society treat it. We all kind of think of it as the same thing,
Right.
but it's not always exactly the same thing. And it doesn't always work to the same degree, and it doesn't always have the same profile of problems or lack thereof.
Right.
So so there is confusion around it for sure.
Well, if anything, it also brings to my mind about the idea that I have been talking about on Frank About Health, that there is a pharmacy in Canada, in Vancouver, actually, Mark's Marine Pharmacy, that I actually had on the show a long time ago, though, when we were radio only. We didn't have Zoom back then. And one of the things that they said is that we would grow and make and manufacture the patented chemical compound, but not charge the US rate when it was distributed in the US, and they would ship out to the US with insurance rates, because they understood the difference in population shift and the condition itself in terms of mass acceptance. But they would be willing to, quote unquote, take the hit, if you will, because as a nation under the crown, which Canada is, they were more into the socialized medicine system.
Yeah.
They figure they made it in-house, they gave it primarily in-house, but to the American neighbors, probably thanks to agreements like NAFTA and the USA Mexico agreement, that they were willing to take care of their counterparts in the United States to offset the expenses that we were enduring due to the way the insurance system works here. All right, it looks like we're about to take a break, fellas. Thank you, Logan. I apologize, but I managed to wrap up the two main indications that we're going to summarize in our final segment. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on Talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargeman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on Talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back as we wrap up this final segment of part one of Intangible Health, both on Frank About Health and on Intangify. Our engineer behind the scenes, Logan, by all means, when you know we're up for a break, feel free to just say, okay, fellas, wrap up. I'm giving you that privilege because of the nature of our discussion today, not being the traditional format where I can actually see 1 minute left, 2 minutes left, whatever. That all being said, we had an interesting half an hour discussion between the vaccines and the drugs about one common factor. Health is definitely an intangible profession, discipline, concept for many people, patients, professionals alike. What we were just exploring was the possibility that patent law or intellectual property law plays a part in it, like especially when people are publishing their research findings to actually come up with a cure for an illness or treatment that has been forever ongoing as a fatal disease, let's say. And of course, epilepsy in itself is a conundrum because we have everything from ketogenic diets to medications that continue all the way to genetic testing and eventual removal of the gene that causes seizures. Now, either way, since there is an incorporation of healthcare and intellectual property law, the continued divide based on holding secrets back and lack of sharing of information doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. It took the pandemic to speed at least a cure for COVID or a solution, because there is no cure. It's an ongoing thing that we've learned to live with. That being said, what is your take on the new innovations that are now being a little bit allowed to come out, like artificial intelligence, or even trying to negotiate Medicare Advantage and give the benefits that Medicare won't cover, traditionally won't cover, or even the discussions about using the mRNA vaccine for curing AIDS and cancer? These are hot topics that are going around that people are now ready to listen to a little bit more seriously because of the experience we just went through the last 3 years. But I do believe we're still going to have those that are going to keep with the way they've been doing their healthcare business as long as time has passed. So what do you think will be the trigger to help create more progress in the future? Will it be artificial intelligence or something else that you might be aware of?
I mean, a trigger, I mean, I certainly think artificial intelligence has its place. It's certainly hot right now and really, you know, impacting everything. You know, do I think that that's going to be what advances healthcare? I don't know. You know,
Maybe to a few groups.
No, look at it. I mean, basically, it's like, it's just fast computing, right? I mean, it's basically just like, okay, we can gather information, process it, and spit something out based on what's out there much more quickly than we used to. That's at least a way of thinking about AI.
Right.
You know, so, you know, if the AI is out there that can go through publications or I don't know, private communications of some sort, if they could get it, I don't know, and it wasn't violating privacy laws or whatever.
Right.
But could aggregate that data and parse it and then say, I spot a trend, right? I mean, that's really kind of what the AI does, right? If you think about AI in outside of the healthcare context, let's use ChatGPT because everyone talks about ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You know, like, all right, let's look at what language is readily accessible out there.
Yes.
Let's pull it all together on a particular topic. Whenever somebody asks a question about particular, let's pull it all together, run some statistics on it basically, and then spit out what is the most prominent aspect, the most prevalent aspect of what's been said across multiple people, and then we'll trust that, maybe.
Maybe, exactly.
And that is sort of the way medicine works in terms of medical technological development. We're going to look at this study and that study and that study. We're going to aggregate it all. We're going to run clinical trials with this drug, all these different places, and then gather all that.
Right.
It just enables you to do it much more quickly.
Right. And that's what we needed in terms of, they called it Operation Warp Speed when the time of COVID came. So, I mean, I could see AI could be more of a catalyst, not a trigger, catalyst.
You can't trust it, just like
True.
You know,
I mean, I'm still afraid of it myself, although I like when Alexa talks to me. No,
like,
I know what you mean.
Like anything else, it's flawed.
Yes.
And you know, do you trust one source of information, even if it's an aggregator? An aggregator doesn't necessarily get you the information that you should be believing,
right?
And you should be trusting. So, look, it's a good source of information, but it does still help to have an expert who can review that and filter it and interpret it,
right?
And think about the things that the AI maybe didn't encounter.
Correct. Correct.
You know, or the misinterpretations. I ran a question in ChatGPT in my profession about sort of how, lawyers like me do one of the things that we typically do to
Right.
see what it would say. And what it spit out was a very nation-centric view on the way things work.
Right.
In other words, the fodder that it used was mostly, let's say, in the United States,
Mhm.
and at the detriment of how things are done and how it's practiced in other countries. And without that lens of here's how it is there and here's how it is there and here are the differences,
Mhm.
it gave a biased, very nation-centric view that would mislead somebody if they didn't have proper counsel.
Right. Right.
So that's sort of my take on AI with healthcare. Yeah, sure, it may drive some ideas, but I still would want to know the scientists behind that was testing it. And then just one last thing on, especially as you relate to flaws.
Yes.
Okay, we got a vaccine out there quickly, but part of the distrust, has to do with, well, what are the long-term impacts of this?
Right.
We don't know if this really is safe. We all kind of took it on a leap of faith. And, whether you doubt it or you don't, if you took the vaccine, you're like, I hope that 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we don't discover that it causes X, right?
True. True.
Which also puts some of the doubt behind it. And I'm not a doubter, I took the vaccine, but I took it with fear, with a healthy dose of fear, just like the anti-vaxxers did,
Yes.
if they took it.
Well, that all being said, everybody, at the end of the day, even though we have innovation coming out there in the future in the healthcare space, we do have experience with COVID to understand that we can take it more seriously rather than be too gun shy about it. But at the end of the day, we are our own best advocates when it comes to our healthcare. So if you are living a very healthy life right now or have an ongoing illness, always go by your feelings, your knowledge base, your current practitioners or doctors, specialists, medications, even if you do acupuncture, go with that and use that as your guide to know what is the best choice to make in managing your healthcare. It is an intangible thing, but it's your choice in how you manage that intangibility. Speaking about intangibility, tomorrow's slate of shows includes his show, Intangify. And who's your special guest on that show?
I can't remember. Oh, Frank R. Harrison, you know him?
Me? Yep. I will see you on and we will continue this discussion, but we will be shifting from the healthcare part to the intangibility asset or the aspect of healthcare. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for paying attention to both of us on this specially produced episode. Thanks to Logan out there for helping us get through all of the details. And we'll both see you tomorrow. All right. And I'll of course see you next week. Take care.
You're listening to Talk Radio.